Welcome to the Tabletop Tommies Bolt Action Podcast. This is our very first episode, and we'll be talking about the Welsh Nationals. I am Jonny, and I'm joined by Phil.
Hello, everyone.
We both attended the event at the weekend. We're recording this on the Tuesday after the event, so that's a bit of a look behind the curtain as to when this gets released. We'll tell you how long it took me to edit it. So I think jumping straight in, I thought the best thing to start with was the venue where it was held.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts, Phil?
So it was at Firestorm Games in Cardiff. I've been there before, went to the Welsh Open last year. It's an awesome venue, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Reese was saying it's a former motorcycle showroom. So really open, really spacious, really light and airy. We were downstairs, which was great. Loads of space around the tables. You could easily walk around. And in terms of facilities, it has what you need. Parking wasn't too bad as well. So yeah, thumbs up for me. Really enjoyed it. Second time there, and looking forward to going to more events there in the future.
Absolutely. I've been there quite a lot for the Welsh Open, Welsh Nationals in the past, and it is, I'd have to say, the best game shop that I've been in. My only complaint with it is its location. If it was closer, it would be the perfect shop.
Sure.
Because they've got all that space both upstairs and down. And then they also have huge amounts of stock, which is brilliant. So every time I go, I always try to buy something.
Yeah.
Because whenever there's a good shop like that, I always wanted to support it so that it stays, essentially. But I think they do pretty well, even without me.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, it was 2.5 hours from where you are, 3 hours from me. So it is a long way for one day, but for a weekend, driving up on the Friday, back on the Sunday, it's definitely worth doing for these 2-day weekend events.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when you have a good host, which sort of leads us on. There's a little segue into our next discussion about the TO themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So Reese TO'd this one.
Yep.
Who is fairly well known in the bottle action community.
Absolutely, yeah.
He did used to play for the WTC Welsh team. He didn't this year, I believe, because of commitments. He's just too busy. So he is a competitive player, and he's played at that level before. So he is. I thought he was a good TO. I'll let you start with any details you want to throw in.
I think from my experience, very clear at the beginning. Outlining what he expected from us. Particularly around player etiquette. Any questions around rules. It was very clear he wanted to see two players at the table with rule books in hand. Having tried to work it out between them before he got called over. I thought the timings were absolutely spot on. It's quite easy, isn't it, at events that you drift, by 10, 15 minutes each round. And then before you know it, you're sort of 30, 40 minutes late by the end of the day. But actually the timings were absolutely spot on, and Reece did really well to manage that. Thumbs up from me. Very, very good. First time I'd been to an event TO'd by Reece. I've played an event with him, but first time as a TO. Really impressed. Well done, Reece.
Yeah, absolutely. Really well done to Reece. And I believe, I could be wrong here, but I think this is the first event he's done with that many players. I think prior to this, all of his events have been smaller sort of club events.
Yeah, so, and he did run that doubles event, didn't he, last year?
Yes.
There's a lot of players of that, wasn't there? So.
Good correction, actually. Yeah, that was a big event. Yeah, that was. So actually, his experience showed there then, because I agree. The times were good. His TOing was spot on. He was round the tables, keeping an eye on stuff. I believe I called him over far more than anyone else.
I believe you did, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and he did call me out on that, but it was always for... Well, we'll talk about it during the games, the kind of stuff I was calling over for. But it was the stuff where if, like a measurement or a line of sight, and there's a bit of contention, and then rather than rolling for it, I always think, why not get an impartial person to come over, give their opinion, and then we can just proceed with whatever the ruling is.
Yeah.
So that was the main thing I was calling them over for. And then a couple of rules disputes, but we'll talk about them during the games themselves.
Queries, I think, rather than disputes.
Yes, I think that is a far better way to say it. What I mean is, one of us read it and said, it says this. Another person reads it and says, it says this. And then we say, okay, Reece, how should we play for the rest of the game? So yes, queries is probably a much nicer way of saying that. So I think the next question is, what did you bring then, Phil?
So this was my first properly competitive event. I was limited somewhat with the models, so it was a fairly obvious British list, built for redundancy, double everything. Double Stewarts, double Gurkha Paras, double engineers, double Brens, double mortars, double 25-pounders, and then a smattering of other bits and bobs. So I did bring the Harman armored car. Thanks to Michael Smith for putting me onto that and lending me that. That was great fun, actually. Flamethrower in a Jeep, observer sniper, double mules. Paul Wickens particularly was impressed with my donkeys, and double lieutenant. So it's 21 dice. Only had 4, proper infantry units, which in hindsight I may well change for another 1250 event. But yeah, no, fairly happy with it. I did have, I think, 3 practice games with the list, so kind of, had a bit of experience going into it. But as I said, it was my first properly competitive event. I kind of knew what to expect, and I knew that if I didn't go down that route, as Brits, I may well come unstuck with my list selection.
Yeah,
that was. What about yourself? Oh, sorry,
well,
Johnny, go on.
Oh no, I was going to say before getting to mine that your list was very much. If you told me someone's building a competitive British list, what do you think is going to be in it? I could have almost written your list for you. The armored car was a bit of a surprise. That's not a common one, although it is becoming more common, just because people like the armor. Because it's basically the same as the airborne Jeep, but it's got that armor value, which makes it a bit tougher.
Yeah, and so it's not armor top, so it's armor 7. Sorry, it's not open top. Armor 7, not open top. Double MMG, but can't split fire, so 10 shots at the same target. And with Recce, as I say, Mike Smith put me onto it. I tried it out in a few games before putting the list in. Really enjoyed using it. Just ordered one as well, so I'd have to borrow Mike's model next time.
Very nice. Yeah, it was really good. I played against it. I was impressed with it. But yeah,
and yourself, yeah.
In my list, I originally with this tournament, I wasn't intending to go because I've always played 1000. That's where I like, because I like to build lists with 0 fat, as I say. And the 1250, I didn't really have a list in mind, and so I wasn't particularly excited about it to start with. But then, speaking to you, you very much convinced me to go, and I was originally going to take my 1000 standard US engineers in Dodge carriers and just add a couple of stewards to it.
Sure.
And then what I thought is, I'm going to see a lot of stewards this weekend. So I'm starting to get a bit bored of seeing them. So rather than joining the party, I thought I'd be a bit different. So what I took was, I took my 2 inexperienced lieutenants, so it was dual platoon. I took 5 squads of engineers with a flamethrower and an SMG. I took the military policeman, which gives you a boost for the reserves. And then I took 6 Dodge carriers to carry them.
Of course.
Naturally. And then it was very much a list of how many Dodge carriers can I fit in. So I also took the tank version of the Dodge carrier, which is a soft skin with a light anti-tank gun on the back, the M6 GMC, one of my favourites. And then other than that, it was the standard 2 rocket launchers, 2 inexperienced heavy mortars, 2 recce jeeps, and then the one you don't see that often is the tractor. I took 2 of the tractors with the heavy machine guns on.
Yeah, and having played against you beforehand, and that was the first time I'd seen the tractors. They're really good.
Yeah, for 40 points, and then it can put a pin on armor. It's absolutely spot on, and also it just scares people, stops people outflanking, because if you got a truck coming in, because it's got a pen value, people get very scared of it. But usually it's 3 shots that usually misses or fails to do anything.
Sure.
So, but yeah, that was, and I practiced. I think I had 1 practice game with that list against you, lost it badly. But then it is very similar to my 1,000 point American list, and so actually, even though I hadn't tried the 1250 version, it played very similar to my 1,000 point list. And I'll talk about how I played, because I've been playing that list for a long time, and so I have standard tactics with it, and it worked at the 1250 as well generally.
Good.
Brilliant.
I know we're going to talk about interesting units in a future episode, and that tractor I hope will appear in that conversation, because
100%.
Yeah, definitely. The other thing I was going to say, we will talk about our own games in a moment. It's interesting you said that you faced a lot of Stuarts. I just did a quick tally. I only faced 2, so there was Paul Wickens, who I played in the second game, had 2 Stuarts. The rest of the weekend, 2 Tigers, 2 with the M15s, 2 with the Dakar Panzers, and then a single SSKI, the Japanese engineering flamethrower vehicle. So I expected to see a lot of lists similar to mine, and I didn't. I was, quite glad's probably the wrong word to use, but I was pleased that I wasn't playing a mirror of my own armies. I didn't play any Brits at all over the weekend.
Yeah, well, I played three British platoons, well, armies rather,
Hmm.
because they were all dual platoon. And in those three games, I faced four Stuarts, I think.
Okay,
Um, so we'll talk about that as we go through, though. So,
sure.
do you want to jump into game one, or was there anything
Yeah,
else on
yeah.
the list you want to discuss first?
No, nothing I can think up. Yeah, let's just jump into game one. So game one was sectors. I was playing Topher Buckle from the Juggers. Topher had a very interesting list. I did talk to him after our game. We finished fairly quickly, and he was on a bit of a WTC detox by his own admission. So he brought 11 dice list. He had two tigers, two multi launchers, four Ostrapen squads, 259 and two lieutenants. Obviously, playing sectors, his 11 against my 21 was interesting from the word go. In terms of how the game went, it was pretty quick, if I'm honest. I basically set my 25 pounders to give me some element of cover against the Tigers. He had his deployed his both his Tigers, both his multi launchers, and one lieutenant and his 259. So that's what he deployed at the start. And then the four Ostrapen and the other lieutenant were off the board. Um, I did pretty well off the prep bombardment. Obviously, being British, got to roll twice per unit. So dished out some pins early on.
Very nice.
And then we basically played cat and mouse. So my Stuarts went one direction as his Tigers came towards me. Managed to take out both the multi-launchers in, I think it was by turn two or three. Did take a hit on turn one for the multi-launcher. That knocked out my armoured car. And then it was a question of, I think he started bringing on his Ostrapen on about turn four. And by that point, I'd kind of run everything I possibly could into his sector and then was skirting around into the other neutral zone, going in the other direction. For me, the funniest moment was I foobarred with my mortar. Sadly, my engineers were within 12 inches of his Tiger. Obviously, I rolled a six, took out my engineers, didn't declare I was going down because I was just about to try and flame his Tiger. And that was, yeah, quite amusing. But yeah, amazing. Wasn't a game changer, but it certainly made us both chuckle. But no, really fun game. I did win that one. Second time I played Topher, really enjoyable. A quick game. We just got on with it. Had a nice little chat during the game and afterwards as well. So that was me. Yourself for sectors?
Yeah, I saw that
Yeah.
list.
Oh yes.
Well, I'd seen
Mm.
Topher's list, and my thoughts after the tournament, as I was going home, I was thinking that is the list that everyone would take if Tigers were good. If the rules weren't
Yeah.
so bad for
Yeah.
Tigers,
Yeah.
everyone would have one because it is
Hmm.
such a cool tank. The other question I had with that list was, what was the half track for?
It was a 259, so it was the closed top recce one.
Ah, yes.
So he basically deployed his two Tigers as close to the center within the 12 inches as possible and just rammed them straight towards me. And then the 259 was on his flank to basically protect the Nebelwerfers. I'd kept my Jeep and flamethrower and LT in reserve, so eventually brought them on and was able to deal with the 259. And then, as I said, the Tigers came
Oh,
towards me and my
brilliant.
Stuarts went, no, we're not having that, and ran away, as you would. Yeah.
Naturally. No, I'd misread the list, and I thought you
No,
took
no,
a
no.
transport with nothing to put in it. So I found it quite funny. I thought because he was just deliberately building the list that was just fun, I thought he'd
No,
just taken a
no.
transport for laughs. But no, that makes more sense because that is
Yeah,
a cracking
absolutely. Yeah.
armored car. Um, yeah, in my game
Hmm.
one, I was playing Alex, who I've played a number of times
Absolutely.
because he's local, and so it was that classic first game of a tournament where you drive 3 hours to play
Yeah,
someone
yeah.
who lives half an hour away. But in fairness, the the first
Yeah,
round
yeah.
was completely randomly picked, and so Reese had no input on who got what
Mm,
table or what opponent. We all picked a
yeah.
bingo ball when we arrived, and then that numbering system was how it was done. So
Just on that note, I thought that was a really good way of doing it. It was actually completely random. We all arrived. We all picked a ball with a number on it. And then one played two, three played four, five played six, and so on. And then you just, one played two on table one, and you worked your way down. So it was genuinely completely random for that first game. And then after that, it went Swiss. But yeah, I thought it was a really simple way of doing it, but
yeah,
effective.
yeah, absolutely one of the best ways I've seen to pair the first round. It's certainly better than what we've seen before, where you get paired in
Yes.
order of arrival, and so you end up. Some of the times you end up playing the person who you were in a car with, who obviously is
Absolutely.
very
I did
local to
indeed
you.
have that last year at a one-day event. Myself and the clubmate had driven up about 2.5 hours just to play each other in round one. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, on to my game one. As I say, I was playing Alex. Alex
hmm
had brought his Japanese, which was
hmm
quite an interesting Japanese list. I believe you
I
played
did.
him in
I
the
did
last
indeed.
game as
Yeah, we'll
well.
come on to that.
So we've both
Yeah.
both seen this list, but the key points were it was very veteran heavy. He had two howitzers. He had the engineering tank, which has all the flamethrowers in all the directions, and some cavalry. And what he did was he set up in his sector with all his stuff. Is the prep bombardment put two pins on his cavalry, I believe, and so they failed their test turn one. And rather than rushing towards me, they kind of just lingered in the middle. The rest of his army was fairly just sort of spread out, started moving towards me. I rushed in, so I reserved 12 dice. So I reserved because what I planned to do was I put the five engineers, the MPs in the Dodgers, and what I was going to do was just rush up the flank as far from my deployment zone as possible, and then I get 12 units in a zone, 36 points. It's very hard to get 36
Yeah.
points without doing it like that. And so I thought this is going to be a reasonably easy win so long
hmm
as he lets me do it. Um, but then what I did was after his cavalry got pinned down and his squads were in the middle, I thought I'd be a bit clever and I rushed in with two flamethrower squads because the secondary was in the middle as well. And I thought they'll quickly mop up the cavalry and the veterans and then take the secondary. But of course they're fanatics, and now with the new fanatics, they ignore flamethrowers. I both flamethrowers came in, killed I
hmm
think one man each, and then of course because it was the Japanese, they just ignored the effective flamethrowers. So then they were very much still a threat. So then I had to bring the other dodgers round. It wasn't a huge problem, but it was very. It felt suddenly what it went from this will be an easy kill to oh dear, I think I'm
Okay.
going to lose some units here. I still managed to get about
Yeah.
14 units into his zone. He got 12 units into mine. There was 2 and 2 in the neutral, so we even on that, and we were even on dice. And so I took the
Okay.
win with 2 units. Um, a couple of mistakes I made late game, which were just rushing up. It was one of those games where the last turn we were racing to get it finished, and I raced a dodge into the artillery. I thought point blank machine gun. Oh, this artillery's going to get it. And then of course it killed one man, did one pin. So he hadn't activated yet. So it then just pivoted and shot the dodge point blank, which of course blew it up. Luckily the squad didn't die. They got out, but I threw away 3 victory points just because I
Right.
was
Okay.
rushing essentially. And I did a similar thing walking into an ambush as well. And that was just the classic sort of tournament rush. If you were down the club, I
hmm
imagine I wouldn't have done it. But luckily, it didn't cost me the game. So I won the
Yeah.
game, got the secondary. It was a shame that to, it
hmm
was a loss for
Yeah.
Alex,
Yeah.
as we know him quite well. But sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
Got to play what's in front of you and who's in front of you as well. Yeah.
Exactly,
Cool.
100%. Brilliant. So game two began. So how was
Game
game
two
two for
was
you
a
then?
great game. So that was nuts. I was playing Paul Wickens. Paul had a very aggressive Soviet list. There was no multi launches. It was Stuarts. It was engineers and body armor, bomb dogs everywhere you could possibly look. 80 rifles, scout squads, and then a couple of heavy mortars. So I expected Paul to push up, which is exactly what he did, and then essentially get to sort of turn four, turn five, and then release the hounds basically and release the engineers, which is exactly how it went. So I put my mortars and 25 pounders and Gurkhas and Stuarts at the start, kept the engineers, and I think I did deploy the armored car as well. So kind of had the engineers and the flamethrower in the jeep with the lieutenant in reserve. My mules were in reserve as well. My dueling donkeys, as Paul kept referring to them as. And then with nuts, obviously, you have the central objective, bang in the middle, and then you take it in turns to place as long as it's 12 inches away. So the secondary was basically in the middle as well. So you had this one objective and the secondary bang in the middle. Paul placed the first objective about 12.1 inches away from the first objective. So I was like, right, that is how we're playing this game. Fair enough. So all four of the other objectives we placed were basically within about 14 inches of the center. So it was clear how this game was going to go. It was a brilliant game. Absolutely loved it. Yeah, it was an absolute bloodbath. I had no idea how it was going to end. Paul pushed really hard on my right flank. I tried to, unsuccessfully, I should add, counter that by bringing on the flamethrower in the Jeep. I did manage to obviously force the recce on the Stuart, and then I just got, wiped out. At that point, I kind of redeployed from my right flank into the centre. On my left flank, on Paul's right, I pushed up with the double MG armoured car and the Stuart. My Gurkhas were kind of hanging around behind buildings. There wasn't a lot of there was lots of buildings. Really nice board actually. It was kind of like aircraft hangars, not Nissan huts. That's what I mean. Yeah, and sort of medical tents. So there was lots of things to hide behind. But because of the number of windows or lack of, you couldn't really run into a building and then leapfrog to the next one. So a lot of hiding and then popping out. So I basically, Paul pushed along my right, I pushed along his right. So we kind of like seesawed around, and then turn 5, turn 6, it just got horrific. So I managed to knock off his pretty inexperienced squad off one objective in turn 6. I also cleared off his units in the central objective. There were bomb dogs going off all over the place. He blew up one of his Stuarts. He blew up one of my Stuarts. And it finished 2 objectives each, with the 5th one unclaimed. I said I'd knocked off his squad from it, but couldn't get my unit onto it. We ran out of time, so we realised sort of turn 5, we were up against it, so we absolutely blitzed through turn 5 and turn 6. And to be fair, Paul said if we had played probably 2 or 3 more dice, he reckons he would have lost it. So really, really enjoyable game. Second time I played Paul, always good fun. Really hard, competitive game, but also a lovely, lovely spirit to the game as well.
Yeah, I've played Paul quite a few times, and it's always a good game. Did you make any mistakes rushing at the end there?
Not at the end. I shouldn't have gone up the right flank. And I did draw him onto my right flank, but I didn't really achieve much from that other than losing some dice. So actually, I might have been better off castling towards the centre. I did have my 2 25-pounders were basically covering the entire middle and could reach out to the back edge where Paul was. So it did make him quite cagey as to what to do with the Stuarts. So that was quite effective. Yeah, I mean, I was happy with the draw, to be honest. Could have been a win. I maybe need to be a bit more aggressive and competitive in future games, but. Yeah, very enjoyable. Thanks, Paul, for the game, if you do listen to this.
Not a bad result, then. So far you had a win and a draw.
Win and a draw,
and any secondaries?
I got the secondary in game 2. So Topher got the secondary in the first game, and then I picked up the secondary in the second game, yeah.
Fantastic. So my game 2 was Josh. Again, everyone was playing the same mission, so of course it was nuts. He was playing Brits, and this was my first Steward of the day. And so it was a classic tournament Brit list where it's got all the standard ingredients: mortars, 25-pounder, sniper, Gurkhas, Steward.
Yes.
He did take the priest, which I thought was a nice addition, made it a little bit more interesting. And yeah, we were playing on this Stalingrad table where, looking at the table, as soon as I got there, I realised there was no way to get anything with wheels from one side of the table to the other. So about 80 inches up the table, there was basically tank traps, barbed wire, full 9 yards, and then in between that, there was ruins. And so I immediately looked at it and realised there's no point in deploying my wheeled vehicles to get up. So what I did was I chose my side, put the 2 objectives right at the back of the ruins to slow his Gurkhas down, and then he deployed a couple of objectives wide. I got to pick the table side, so I chose the side where the 2 objectives were close to each other. And then basically what I did was I did the same idea with my reserves, where I reserved 6 dodgers and 6 units inside the dodgers, and I sent them on the outflank to basically wait till late game to steal one of his objectives. It was a big swing. The game was so jumping ahead. It was a big win, this game, for me. He turned up not very happy for some reason. I don't know if he was unhappy because he didn't want to face this particular army, or if he was unhappy because I'd upset him previously.
Both possibles.
But yeah,
both possible. Yeah,
both possible. But anyway, yeah, he wasn't in the best of moods to start with. And then the first dice of the game, he had reserved most of his army, and all my mortar could see was a sniper and his 25-pounder. And so what I did was, I'm going to shoot the mortar at your sniper. Do you want to go down? And of course he was like, no. And then of course I got the 6. So took a sniper, and then my next unit, rocket launcher. Now all that could see was his 25-pounder. So again, I'm going to shoot it. Do you want to go down? No.
Yep.
And then of course a 6. So at that point, before I even rolled the wound, he was picking up his models, and that was the kind of mood he was in. He was like, "This is not going well." And then the rest of the game was fair. It was a really quick game because we did the classic down dice in reserve. No one could really see anything because of that first turn, and so the first few turns went really fast. And what he was doing was he'd held back his priest and his steward and his most of his Gurkhas and his flamethrower and a jeep, and he'd done that to try and counter my outflank when it arrived. And then what happened was basically turn 4, because I had to wait till turn 4 to do the outflank because the middle was blocked by a ruin. I just waited him out essentially because I had 24 dice, and I believe he was at about 16. And we got to the point where he essentially had to activate a reserve first, and he decided this is the time. Otherwise, we're just going to wait till turn 6, and it's going to be the same thing anyway. And so he decided this is the time we'll start bringing reserves on, which he brought about 3 units on. He had his steward, his priest, and some Gurkhas. And at that point, it basically allowed my engineers to come in on the dodgers, flame stuff, and then wipe out a few units, took out the priest. And then at that point, there wasn't really much he could do. And he said, look, I don't think there's anything I can do now, so I'm quite happy to just call the game now. And so, yeah, so it was a bit of a big win for me. And it was just, I think the thing that swung it was that idea of holding his reserves to counter my outflank. Whereas actually, I think if he'd fully deployed and rushed my inexperienced units that were on the back lines, there would have been very little I could do about it. So yeah, that was a win with a secondary.
2 from 2.
Yep, 2 wins, 2 secondaries. So it was going well thus far.
Until
until
you jump in then to follow on with your game 3, and then I'll finish off.
Fair play. So clearly,
spoilers
there. Game 3 did not go as well. Game 3 was no man's land. Not one of my favourite missions, especially facing Brits.
Who are you playing, Johnny?
So I was facing Russell Wright of Southend, and he has played. I think Brits is his go-to for competitive tournaments, and so it was the standard list of sort of Gurkhas, the usual British stuff. He again mixed it up by not taking 2 stewards. He took a steward.
He did.
And he took one of your favourites. He did the Lee with the 2 big guns. It is a good tank, to be fair. I can understand why it's becoming more and more popular now. So slightly more interesting list, but essentially it was British Gurkhas. He had the prep bombardment. It didn't happen, which was really beneficial. We'd set up, and the way the table was set up, it was a desert table. There was a little town on one side. There was a railway track running across, which caused a bit of contention. Because essentially, Russell wanted to play it as rough ground, which meant wheeled vehicles couldn't go across it. Infantry could only advance. But because it went from about 2 foot into his side of the table all the way to my corner, what it meant was essentially it would just kill that corner. My units wouldn't be able to go into it. All my wheels wouldn't be able to go into it. And so it would just allow him to sit his tanks over there, and there would be nothing I could do about it. So I was very insistent that it just be treated as open ground. And we came to a compromise decision where essentially it was open ground, but you could only advance over it, which is fine, essentially, because that's
now
all
I believe this was one of those moments where you might have had to call Resaber to discuss the matter as well.
It was indeed. It was indeed, because Russell was very insistent that in the real world a Jeep wouldn't be able to drive over the tracks, and I was very insistent that regardless of that, it wasn't going to be a very enjoyable game if we decided that train tracks were rough. And so I think it was a good compromise. And we got there in the end. But yes, you're absolutely right. It did require TO intervention, that one. But as I say, there was no cover in my deployment zone. So what I did was I essentially castled up in one corner with everything. I deployed all my soft-skinned vehicles that were going to deploy in basically a wall in front of my inexperienced units. And there were some pictures that Reese put out on the Facebook where people commented on that deployment. Because essentially all my inexperienced stuff was very vulnerable. There wasn't really anywhere they could have hid. And then the only thing I put on the other flank was I put 2 recce jeeps on the other flank because he deployed his mortar and his forward artillery reserver on that flank. And I thought, I'll be able to rush up. And I had a cunning plan with that. And the cunning plan was, I'll rush up, steal a dice by killing that mortar. And then what it'll do is it'll lure his steward out. Is because he'd kept his steward back in reserve. And it worked. It lured his steward out. And so his steward was on his right flank, my left flank. All of my units, other than the jeeps, were on my right flank. So as far as possible from his steward, which worked brilliantly. But what happened was they didn't kill the mortar and they didn't kill any of the small teams. So actually, it was a trade of 2 dice. It still could have been okay. But what I'd done, and the thing that cost me the game, was I'd reserved... I'd done my classic reserve. The same as I did the last 2 games. I reserved 6 Dodgers, 6 squads inside of them, ready to sweep in from the right flank from turn 3. And then I rather foolishly parked a tractor at the start of turn 3 at 24 inches up the table. Which meant, unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to bring my... I basically blocked my own outflank. It was really stupid. As soon as I realised I'd done it, I thought, I think I've lost the game now because I can't bring my reserves in this turn, which means he has another turn of whittling my units down that are on the table before I can sweep in. But I thought, it's not lost yet. I could sweep in turn 4, do really well. But unfortunately, that mistake was then compounded by my reserve rolls in turn 4. So the first one I rolled, because of the military policeman, you get +1 to your reserve rolls. Americans already don't get the -1. And so my regular Dodge trucks were testing at 10 to come on the board. And the first one rolled an 11. Second one, 11 again. And so at that point, I knew the game was lost because I was then sweeping in with only, 3 units of engineers and some military policemen. And so I knew that that wasn't enough firepower, especially with the stubborn Gurkhas, to swing the game back in my favour. And so at that point, the game was lost and we were basically playing for the secondary. And then so I continued playing. Last dice of the game, essentially, I was trying to get my officer to the secondary. He was in rough ground. I wanted to do the charge. I didn't get the dice because we ran out of time. But afterwards, we quickly measured and I was 7 inches away anyway. And so it was a very convincing win for Russell and a convincing secondary there.
I was going to say, it's a very strong list. I'm just looking at it now. It was 5 squads of Gurkha Powers, SMGs all over the place. Like you said, with the Lee and Stuart. Russell did joke at one point that he basically bought the assault group's entire stock of SMG Gurkhas prior to the event. So, it's probably why I couldn't buy any, to be fair.
That's probably why they're out, There is one thing that I did actually that I surprised myself with. The one thing I did that I've never seen anyone do in a competitive tournament, at least not on the anyone who finishes in the top 10, I fired smoke.
You did. We were playing next to each other on the tables, and I did turn around at one point as I heard you saying, "I'm going to release the smoke." I was like, "What is going on?"
Because essentially we so Russell had set up a sniper to try and snipe my mortar. He went to take a shot, and then I remembered, visibility in no man's land, you can only see 24, and he'd set his sniper up about 26 inches from my mortar, so that protected my mortar from his sniper. But then what I realised was, in doing that, I realised my mortar, my rocket launchers, they can't say anything, they can't do anything this turn. And so rather than just send them down, and they didn't need to redeploy because I was already castling up, I thought, well, why not? I've got no cover. What's it going to cost me to fire some smoke? And so the mortar, I fired the mortar first. It did nothing. He just sort of put it next to the train tracks to block my line of sight for later turns. But the multi-launcher, I rolled a 6 to hit, which was incredible. Because then you get the D3 -1 additional smokes, and I believe they're 5 inches each. And I basically made a 15-inch wall in front of my unit, which meant that his forward artillery observer could barely see anywhere on my corner where all my units were. And he ended up in turn 2, I believe it was, he had to essentially put it very near the corner, which meant later on when he rolled for it, it miscalculated. And I think he rolled about a 9 and it just fell off the table. But yeah, the smoke actually panned out quite well, considering the rules are terrible for it.
And we've played before where you've deployed smoke, so it's not the first time you've used that tactic. But yeah, and that's just a fair point. No man's land first turn where you can't see beyond the 24 inches. In some ways, if you're not getting any natural cover from the table, why not stick some smoke down on that first turn if you can?
Absolutely. The only reason I would usually not do it is because, as I say, the rules are terrible. Because your opponent gets to place it. I've done it before, where opponents have then screwed you over by dropping it in front of your sniper, for example. So now your sniper has to redeploy. In that game, he was coming at me with his Gurkhas anyway, so there was very little to lose. And so when we've done tournaments before, and when I play sort of casually, if I know that smoke's going to be used, or if I want people to use smoke, we always change it to a scatter, because then at least it ends up roughly where you want it, rather than just in the worst possible place. Yeah.
Cool.
What about your game 3?
So my game 3 was against Gary Morgan. I played him before against a similar list to what Gary took the weekend. So it was a US list, leaning heavily into autocannons. So he had 2 of the M15 half tracks, which has got the heavy autocannons, and MMGs, I think, or HMGs. What might be HMGs actually. Yeah.
It's heavy machine guns. 2 heavy machine guns and 1 heavy
so he had
autocannon.
Two of those.
Nice.
He had an additional heavy autocannon, the static one, the fixed one, multi-launcher, and then engineers in trucks, Recce G, BAR, double BAR squads everywhere, engineers, obviously, mentioned them, sniper, bazooka, and so on. So a list I've seen before from Gary, albeit at 1,000 points previously. So I lost the dice for deployment, and the way that the table was, on one side, there was essentially a solid line of hedges from one side of the table to the other. The only gap was a road that was coming from the table edge into the table, and then the road dispersed. Bearing in mind, say I had a Jeep, he had a couple of trucks. He wasn't going to choose that side, so I had to take that side. I deployed my armored car on the road, because I thought I want to get the armored car on, get it moving, take advantage of the road. That didn't quite work out for me. So I lost lost 4 units by pretty much early on in the second turn, including the armored car. So the armored car had now blocked the road. So my Jeep with the flamethrower and the lieutenant in it, which was in reserve, couldn't do anything the entire game. So Gary very quickly went four dice up. I think it went 4-1, then 5-1. And at that point, this was around about turn 3, I had to go on the offensive. So I pushed up my Stuarts, pushed up my engineers in the Brens. Gary quite rightly went, let's run away and hide, because if I can't see him, I can't shoot him, and therefore I can't take any dice from him.
That is the problem with No Man's Land. It's one of the reasons it's not one of my favourite missions, because especially with that prep bombardment, if someone gets lucky and takes 3 or 4 of your units, there's no incentive for them to then come at you. They might as well just hide, go into ambush.
Sure. So Gary played it very, very well tactically. So once he'd gone up 3-4 dice, he just retreated out of line of sight. My Gurkhas did hardly anything the entire game. They were deployed on my left flank to kind of advance through quite an area of rough ground and hedges. I kind of skirmished a little bit with some of his BAR squads. They ran away, so I couldn't charge them. So my only hope really was just to push forward with the engineers in the Brens and the Stuarts. So did take a few dice. I think it finished 7-3, 7-4, something like that to Gary. Nobody got the secondary, so I finished the day with a win, a draw, and a loss. But yeah, happy. Happy with all 3 games. Three really good opponents. Would have been nice to have maybe snuck something in either the second or the third game. But overall, really enjoyable first day.
Brilliant. I have played on that exact table before, I believe, because I think I think
yes.
Reese actually built that table. And it is a lovely table. It looks really nice. It's very sort of picturesque. But when I played it, I had a very similar experience where I was quite frustrated by some of the way that some of the things were arranged, like the fields not having gates, and so infantry can't run through it. As you say, your jeep got stuck because of it. And then equally, the other side of the table is very open, and so it is one I think that could be slightly optimized for a gameplay perspective, where you just add gates to the fields, and I think that probably would have saved the game for you,
if there was basically if there was a way of getting off my or out of my first 9 inches with a wheeled vehicle, then I could have got the jeep out. To be fair, Gary had run away at that point, so I had a long way to go to get my flamethrower close to anything to flame it. Reece did say that he built that table based on where he lives. So yeah, very nice part of Wales by all accounts, if the table represents it.
There's some lovely wildlife on that table as well, isn't there?
There were sheep, there were cows, there were pigs. Yeah,
and I believe there's even a fox staring down
yes,
some rabbits on that table. Yeah, brilliant. Well, funnily, because Gary won that game, it meant I played him in game 4.
So start of day 2, start of Sunday morning, game 4. Yeah.
Yeah, day 2 begins. I'd been told I had to avenge you for that defeat.
Maybe a strong word to use, but yeah. Bring honor back to the south.
South.
That's probably a better way of putting it.
Yeah, and so I've played Gary before. I believe when I played him, so I played him at the last Welsh Nationals, I believe, and he had a German platoon, and you'd never guess he also had autocannons on half tracks then.
There's a theme.
He very much.
Yeah.
He knows what he likes. Yeah, and he likes what he knows. But yeah, and I played him. So last Welsh Nationals, we played double envelopment, and I caught him off guard doing something he wasn't expecting. And so I thought, I'm going to try to do the same thing, catch him off guard with something he's not expecting.
And just for people listening, what was the mission for game 4?
So, well, that mission, it was timely objectives. And so I'd read the pack, and I'd had a look to see what shenanigans could I pull that would surprise Gary, because I thought he might enjoy it in a sort of in a game perspective. I imagined he wasn't going to enjoy when I did the shenanigan, but he always finds it quite interesting, I think, when I find an interesting rules quirk. What was really nice, actually, in that game is we had also played a beachhead recently, and double envelopment there as well, so it was really nice to play him at something that wasn't double envelopment. And we had a few sort of cover. So there was times when we'd done cover, and it wasn't very clean at beachhead, where should this person be getting cover or not. And so actually what was really nice at the beginning, Gary sort of raised, well, how are we running cover? And then we clarified the 50% rules, etc. And it was really nice because it meant we had a really clean game from our perspective after that point. So anyway, to the plan. So my plan in that game was, I thought, what I'm going to do, the rules pack said, the tournament pack was changed from 3 inches of the objective touching the objective. The objectives were about 40 mil discs, I believe. And my tractors were wider than 40 mil. And now Reese had consistently ruled in day 1 that, because I'd said, what do you think we should do with vehicles? And he said, destroy vehicles, just leave them, even soft skins. That's generally how people play it. It does say in the rule book to agree with your opponent, but generally if the TO says this is the way it should be played, that's the best way to play. And so what I thought before the game was, well, if I park this tractor on this objective, he can't touch it. And now the tractor wouldn't score me victory points because only infantry and artillery was scoring. But what it meant is if I could go a couple of points up, I could then just block the objectives for him, which isn't the most sporting thing to do, I will admit, but it was fun, for me at least. I'd love to hear what Gary thought of it, and I'm sure I will hear at the next tournament that I see him at. So anyway, so that was the plan going in. I got the 2 objectives to deploy. I put 2 of them. We were on a winter table with fields in each corner, a road running right down the middle. It was slightly offset, towards one side. And so the field on one side ended short of the middle. And on one side of the table, because it was sort of rotationally symmetrical, if you will, where my left flank had a field, his left flank had a field, my right flank had like woods, his right flank had woods. But the difference was on the side that he chose, because he got to choose. His field had a gate at the front, whereas mine didn't. And now during deployment, when I got the two objectives, what I thought was I'll put them in front of the field without a gate, and I'll just risk getting the pick sides because that'll really slow him down getting to them. And then, of course, I lost the roll-off, and he got to choose sides. And he did think about it for a while, so I thought, oh, I might still get lucky here. But unfortunately, he saw it. He chose the right side, and it put me on the back foot a little bit. During the prep, so what I did is I deployed my dodgers with the engineers in, which is very much against the competitive advice when there's a prep bombardment. But in order for me to get off my idea, where I was just going to rush the objectives early and block them, I had to take the risk. Unfortunately, on one flank, I lost a dodge and I lost the entire squad inside as well. They lost 3 men, then failed their order test. On the other flank, I lost one dodge, got immobilized. The squad therefore got out and just sort of lingered around, which slowed them down, but at least they didn't die. And then I'd reserved 2 tractors, the 2 dodges with the anti-tank guns, and the military policeman in a dodge, so that I got the boost to reserve rolls. I rushed up turn 1 with this squad on the right flank to park in front of the one objective. What I was hoping was, because there's a dodge with a squad inside in the open, I thought, hopefully he'll shoot that, kill the dodge, the squad will fall out onto the objective and I'll get a victory point turn 1. But he's a good player. He is a WTC player as well. And he saw right through it, and so he didn't take the bait at all, which would have been, if he had, it would have been an early lead for me, because it would have meant they were behind the vehicle as well, so they had really nice cover. He didn't take the bait, which meant it was about turn 2, I believe, or turn 3, where I managed to get 2 of the objectives. It was turn 2. I got 2 of the objectives. I went 2 victory points up, because up until that point, no one had scored any. He had a bazooka that had deployed 12 inches on his right flank away from the objective. It took 1 pin in the prep and then failed its order test. And so, really luckily, it just went down. And then that gave me time to get up and get the 2 victory points. And then turn 3, I came in and just outflanked my tractor onto the objective. It was just before this, he had shot at my recce jeep, and then my recce jeep had wrecked onto the right-hand objective because he'd cleared the squad, but he hadn't managed to get anyone on it yet. It wrecked onto the objective, which put the recce jeep between that anti-aircraft vehicle you were talking about earlier, and he had a squad of engineers between the recce jeep and that anti-aircraft vehicle, which meant he then couldn't shoot at it. But then at that point, it clicked with Gary that what happens if I do park on the objectives? And that was when he clarified with Reese. So actually, on that occasion, Reese did get called over to my table, but it wasn't me who called him over. Well, it was because of what
you did, to be fair, but...
to be fair, yes, but I didn't call him. But Gary clarified with Reese. He said, well, what happens if a vehicle gets us around the objective? And Reese said, well, you can't, it's impassable, so you can't get the objective. And that was when Gary realised what I was trying to do, because basically, by the end of the game, I'd parked 1 tractor on the objective on the left flank, and he just ignored it at that point, because he was like, there's no point destroying it now. And then on the right flank, I'd basically circled the wagons. I had a dead dodge, and then 2 dead jeeps around this one on the right flank, and then we were basically fighting over the one in the middle, and we ended just 2-0. And I believe I got the secondary for that one as well. Yes, it was on the bridge, sort of away from the objectives, and it was the classic, when you know there's sort of a few minutes left in the game, because one of the good things, Reese had a big clock set up there, and so I could see, so I was just keeping an eye on the time, and when there was only a few minutes left, my officer did the classic thing where he jumped from behind the bridge onto the bridge and just nabbed that secondary for us. So it was a game. I'm not sure it was my finest strategy, but I did make a plan, and the plan worked perfectly. And I hope Gary appreciated the fact that it was. I found it really fun that we'd basically found this quirk in the rules to get around it, because I don't think, because my army's very squishy, it's all regulars, all inexperienced. If I'd had to sit in the middle and just weather the storm, I think he probably would have shifted me by turn 4 and then took sort of 2 or 3 victory points a turn.
Cool.
How did your game 4 go then?
Yeah, very good. Similar tactics to you, although I didn't deliberately destroy my units on top of the objectives, but it was fairly similar. So I played Phil Parker. Phil brought a German DAC list. So he had a double DACA Panzer threes, an 8 Rad, a 259, heavy howitzer, one of the packs. I think it was the medium version, and not a lot of infantry. So he had two pioneers. I think there were maybe only 5-man squads, possibly 6, and 2 vet squads. So very light on infantry, but all the toys. So in terms of how we deployed, obviously for timely objectives, the center point, and then we kind of pushed out from there. So I was able to. I had a road on my left flank, which was running from my edge of my board all the way in. So I dumped the first objective basically on the halfway line on that road. My plan being that if I could, I was just going to drive up with my engineers beyond the objective because I was on the road, so advance up with the Bren, and then hop out and just sit on the objective from there on in. And then the middle objective, I was able to deploy Gurkhas bang on 12 inches so they could basically run onto the objective turn 1. Gurkha Powers, they're just going to go down for the rest of the game. And then the third objective, exactly the same with the other Gurkhas. My 25-pounders were covering the middle and the right-hand objective, and my Stuarts were sort of floating around. I got I was going to say lucky, very good dice rolls for prep bombardment. Obviously, being British, you can roll double. So put a lot of pins out, which actually was incredibly beneficial early on in the game. I also knocked out his 8 Rad with the prep bombardment, so hit it on the top. Got the +3 pen and went from there. So yeah, very good, prep bombardment. And then
yeah, I was very jealous of all the British players who turned up to a tournament and got 3 missions with prep bombardment, which was unexpected. I was expecting sort of 2 of the 5 to have prep, and so when it went to 3, I thought, I'm really quite jealous of the British players right now.
So turn 1, I basically had one brain carrier of engineers lined up for one objective, the other brain carrier directly facing a second objective. 2 Gurkhas able to run onto that objective and one other. I was staring down a heavy howitzer, his pack, and both Panzers at that point. So I was like, really do need to kind of get an early dice here and either just bomb forward or try and take out the howitzer. The heavy howitzer went, I think, on turn 2. I managed to get the Bren up, put some pins on the pack, and he kept failing his dice rolls for the Panzers. So basically, by the end of turn 1, I had 2 objectives. He had none. By the end of turn 2, I had all 3, so I was on 5 points to 0 at that point, and it just went from there, and just the points just racked up. So I think we got to the beginning of turn 5, and basically once I got to 14 points to none, there was no way that Phil was going to come back.
Was that the final score? 14.
We called it early because I got the secondary. There was no way that I was going to get. There was no way that he was going to get any of my guys off the objectives. I'd whittled down the 4 squads to about 3 or 4 men across all. I think there were 2 left, 2 squads at that point. One of the Panzers had gone, the 259 had gone, the pack had gone, the howitzer had gone, the 8 Rad went in prep bombardment. So there was very little he can do. So yeah, I ran a Gurkha squad onto the secondary, pushed up my lone inexperienced officer to claim that objective, and at that point, Phil decided that it was only going to go one way. But no, incredibly enjoyable game. I absolutely love that game. Haven't played Phil before. I've seen him around at lots of events and tournaments. There's a few chuckles that obviously Phil was going to win that game one way or the other, unless we both drew, to be fair. And Phil won the most sporting prize, which I think was thoroughly deserved. And I had a really enjoyable game against him. So yeah, but tactically, obviously we talked about it beforehand. My plan was just to rush forward, use the Brens as cover, sacrifice them if needs be, pop the engineers out, sit on an objective, and then the Gurkhas, once they got to the objectives, could just go down for the entire game. So yeah, very enjoyable game, not just because of the result, but also the way it was played.
Yeah, that's a great strategy as well. It's an absolute classic. You take the Brens, you charge them up, and you just create a wall, basically. Especially in those situations where it's an objective. Yes. The objective's in the open. Yeah. If you want to sacrifice your Bren.
Yeah, and I placed my objective, I deliberately put it in the open because I thought I've got stubborn Gurkha Powers. I don't, not being in cover, I'll probably weather it, kind of thing. Whereas if I had put it behind cover, yes, he had vets, but they weren't stubborn. I was going to give him an advantage if he got to that objective first. So,
Yeah, great shout.
mm-hmm.
So what's your results at the end of
So
game
we're now
4?
on
What does that put you on?
2 wins, a draw, and a loss. So going into game 5, I was in 6th place.
Very nice. Yeah, it's a strong place to be. And then, yeah, I was going in. So I'd won 3 of the 4, lost 1, and I had 3 secondaries. So I don't know what position I was in. I imagine. Do you know what position I was in at that point?
If you hold on a moment, you were. So round 4 going into it, you were in 3rd place, equal on points to person in 2nd. You'd lost more units at that point. So you'd had
so I was naturally
3 wins, 1 loss, 3 secondaries. So 2nd and 3rd were on the same points going into round 5. And then 5th and 6th, so my opponent was 1 point ahead of me going into round 5. So round 5 was meeting engagement, and it was against Alex, who you played in the first game, who also is someone that we know well. We play a lot together at Pegasus Warlords in Aldershot and other events locally. I think we'd also seen Alex's list because he shared it in our chat beforehand. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I believe I've actually played... I don't think I've played that exact list, but I have played Alex with his Japanese. At one of your events, actually, but that was an 850.
That's right, yeah. That was a little fun event earlier on this year down in Havant, yeah.
Yeah. And so I'd seen the essence of the list, just without all of the toys, essentially. But Alex had done, just before you talk about the game, one of the things we noticed afterwards is Alex had done the proper submarine.
Oh, completely, yeah.
After that first game when he lost, it was periscopes down, and because one of the things we noticed is he didn't get the secondaries on his wins.
No.
And so one of the things, as you look through, it meant he was always, for the people who had won, let's say, 2 of their 3 games, because he didn't get the secondaries, he was always the bottom of that list of players. Right. Well, not always the bottom, but it meant he was never in sort of 3rd position if he was going against a whole string of people with 2 and
that's
1.
right.
And so he did really well to. I don't know if that was intentional. I imagine it wasn't.
I don't think it was the knowing Alex, submarine. He didn't intentionally lose to you. No. But no, we'll come on to that when we talk about the final standings. But yeah, so yeah. Alex needed to win. He had, like you said, he had, his veteran Japanese list. Couple of flamethrowers, the SSKI, 4 HEs, two howitzers, 2 mortars. Howitzers had spotters, the mortars didn't. Double sniper, cavalry. He won I think I won the roll-off actually, and then actually put him in a better position for his army. So that's something for me to learn. He just hid behind cover. He basically played in about an 18-inch square, maybe 24-inch square part of the board. He put everything behind some buildings in his corner. He had, snipers peeking out. He had his spotters for his howitzers to see me, his mortars sneaking out. And once he'd gone up by a couple of points, he was like, right, I'm in the lead now. It's meeting engagement. I need to win by 2 points. I think I got 1 back. So then we traded points basically. So I never felt like I was going to win the game at all. I'd have to go some way to draw the game. I was hoping, because of how tightly packed in he was in his corner, I was hoping that if I could get my artillery observer to fire off, I might get a lucky roll. I didn't. It scattered off the board. No, scattered right. Sorry, out of the area. I think I hit one of his infantry units, and that was it. So I had to go chasing the game. Didn't manage to pull it off. Never before have so many units been on ambush for so many turns. We basically, I was hiding my units, he was hiding his units. We were kind of staring at each other in a friendly but forceful way across the table. Ambush, ambush, ambush. Off we go. The mules, they're on ambush, ready to kick anyone that came near them. And then it livened up on turn 6 because Alex had his cavalry in distance of the secondary. I had 3 units on ambush for his secondary. I had an engineer in a brain unit off the board, so I was going to race on them and grab the secondary, but I was waiting for him to make his move. I did manage to knock out his cavalry, so the secondary didn't get claimed, but I wasn't able to get there myself. So that finished with a win to Alex. can't remember the final dice results. It was about 6-3, something like that, 7-3. With
So not a huge difference.
Not a huge difference, but I absolutely was chasing it. I never felt like I was, putting my nose in front at all. Very well played from Alex, tactically spot on. To be fair, as you'd expect from Alex, he absolutely thinks about the game. He knows how to play that list and plays it very well. So, well done.
Oh, absolutely. I think in our game, it was very much. It was one of those games where it could have went either way. As I say, it came down to 2 units in the deployment zone, and so we had a very similar game where it was close and it could have went either way. And I think actually one of the things I didn't mention in that game 1 roundup was the thing I think that swung it was he had a truck with engineers and a lieutenant in, or it might have been with a flamethrower, and I just got a lucky 6 on it. So of course he lost 3 victory points for that, and I think one of the units died as well. So actually those 2 units I got in his zone, that's what it was. And so he is a very strong player. Which showed in his overall result.
Yeah. And your final game?
So my final game was against someone who's well known in the community, Rich C, who is a good player. Went to the WTC this year. He ran the most classic of British competitive lists. Although actually I take that back because he did something I didn't expect. So he had his usual double Stuarts. He had some mortars, the usual shenanigans. He had Gurkhas. And then the thing that surprised me was late in the game I realised his Gurkhas weren't the para Gurkhas.
Okay.
And so they didn't have stubborn. And that surprised me because I thought he would have just naturally taken the stubborn version. I didn't really get a chance. It was quite a... So if we used all the time, so I didn't get a huge amount of time to talk to him about why he'd chosen not to take the stubborn ones. But that was a bit of a surprise. So it was meet and engagement. He got to choose sides. The table was actually super symmetrical, so it was one of those ones where it didn't really matter hugely. I think looking at it, I did want the side he chose, but as I said, it was so symmetrical that it was much of a muchness. He decided, so we've played before, and I think he's played my American list as well, where very similar tactics, meet and engagement. I'm going to hide half my army and then whiz in late in the game. And so he decided to outflank 2 of his Gurkha squads. One of them was in a truck. He had his Brengineers, and he had a flamethrower in a Jeep. And what he did was, so I assumed what he'd done was he'd outflanked them all on one flank because I've played him before and I've done that against him. And I thought what he's done is he's gambling which flank, and then he's basically going to wait for me to outflank, and then he's just going to come in behind and take out all my squishy stuff. But actually what he did was he split them. So early game what he did was he rushed up with his 2 Stuarts and his recce vehicle. He rushed them up just looking for easy targets, but there wasn't a huge amount. He got a couple pins on stuff. I then brought in, because with the meet engagement it's the first wave, I'd brought in my 2 Dodge carriers with the light anti-tank guns behind a ruin. And as they came in, because he'd been so aggressive, because I think his strategy was, I'll wipe the inexperienced units before everything else arrives, and then I can basically just turn around to the flank. He'd rushed forward, which meant my Dodgers could come in, see the recce vehicle, the
airborne recce Jeep, double G.
No, it was the same one you ran.
Marm and Harrington.
Harrington. So he'd ran that 24 inches up, which meant I could put my Dodgers behind a ruin where the Stuarts couldn't see them, and then take pop shots at it. They both missed the turn they arrived, but then the following turn I got the first dice. So I put the one in front on ambush.
Of course,
And then I can't remember who got the next dice, but basically the next dice I got, I then put the Dodge behind onto a fire order. And of course he knew, as I said earlier, he's a good player. He knew exactly what I was doing. It is exactly how all the tactic videos say, this is how you deal with recce vehicles. You put one thing in ambush and then you shoot them with something else, and now they've got a choice of which one they're going to get shot at by. He knew it was coming, so immediately went, okay, I am going to recce, take your shot. Took the shot, popped it, and that was a highlight of the game for me because it's the only time I think I've successfully pulled that maneuver off. Every previous time it's been I never seem to get the dice early enough, or something goes wrong with it basically,
Yeah, you can't quite set it up as you
Yeah, or something gets in the way. Perhaps like he advances his infantry between the gun, and then, but yeah, it went perfectly. And I got the hit and
want.
blew it up. And then at that point, he had his two stewards still, which were very dangerous because my whole army's squishy. Throw 18 shots at my inexperienced mortar rocket launcher officer, I'm going to lose them.
Yeah.
And I fired my rocket launcher at his two stewards, luckily within 6 inches of each other. So I fired at one to splash at the other, and I actually got a hit, but then did no damage.
Right, okay.
And then next dice, rocket launcher again, got a hit on the same steward, but still no damage. But it did mean that steward was on 5 pins, and so effectively it didn't do anything for at least, I think it was at least one turn. It was 2 turns, because the following turn, he tried to give it a rally and foobarred, and then shot his Gurkhas at point blank in front of him.
Yeah.
But he was on 5 pins, and so it did very little damage to them. But it was quite a funny moment. But yeah, that was after that. I outflanked, came in, and I managed to just pick things off. Because he'd split his outflank, it meant that after I'd outflanked, he actually had a squad of Gurkhas on foot who were completely out of position. I had castles on my right flank, and these squad of Gurkhas came in on my left flank, and everything of mine was within 3 foot of the right table edge. And so turn 3 or 4 when they came in, the Gurkhas were never going to have an impact in the game.
Okay.
He did really push aggressively, though, with the flamethrower. The officer, the flamethrower in a jeep, and the squad of Gurkhas in a truck, super aggressively came into my very back right-hand corner, because I think he was planning to do the classic like walk down the back line and just take the dice a turn. But because I'd managed to flamethrower one steward, nebble out the other one, it meant essentially I could just bring my engineers back to deal with it. And I did lose a couple of dice like here and there, but it meant that the game swung my way essentially. And at the end, I think we finished 9 dice to 7.
Okay.
It might be 6. It seemed closer than the game felt, because we were sort of throwing. As I say, at the end when he was rushed on, I think I lost the transport. But at that point, the game was mine essentially, because he had very little offensive capability left, and so I had 5 units ready to deal with like one squad of Gurkhas in my zone. We did have an interesting rules dispute in that one, which I'm sure we'll talk about when we do a rules episode. Where I'll give a preview, and then we can talk about it in greater depth in the future, rather than wasting 10 minutes on it now. But yeah, essentially, he had charged a soft skin, got 5 hits on it, rolled to damage, rolled a 1, and now, before he even rolled it, funnily, I said anything but 1, and it's wrecked because you don't even got the damage table with a soft skin. And then what happened was, of course, he rolled the 1. And then Rich thought that actually that still counts as damage, still would wreck it, because it adds up to 6. That's the vehicle's armor value.
Correct.
It gets wrecked. I thought a roll of a 1 always fails. We looked in the rule book. In the shooting section, it does say that a roll of a 1 always fails to do damage. Rich's argument was, but it doesn't say that in the close quarters section. And so we ended up getting Reese over. Reese couldn't decide which way the rulebook intended it to be, so actually we just rolled for it. And I believe the result was that it didn't get wrecked, but it was a little bit irrelevant because the vehicle had 4 pins on it, and because it has the light anti-tank on the back, he charged it from the back, so even when I failed my test, it wouldn't reverse. And so essentially it was trapped there, and all it meant was it had 1 more turn on the table. So it didn't change the outcome of the game, but it was a bit of an interesting rules dispute.
One we may well discuss in a future episode.
Oh, 100%. Definitely one for a discussion, that one. So, where did we end up then? So you ended up with 3 wins.
Two wins, 1 draw, 2 losses. And 2 secondaries, I think. Yep.
Fabulous. And I ended up with 4 wins, a loss, and every game I won, I got the secondary, I believe. So I think I also had 4 secondaries.
You did, yeah. So 4 wins, 1 loss, 4 secondaries. And then mine was 2 wins, 1 draw, 2 losses, and 2 secondaries. You lost 36 dice over the 5 games, and I lost 27.
Yeah, actually, that's more than I was expecting. you to have lost because I played very aggressively. So I always play a way where I'm quite happy to trade dice, and especially in games where it's not kill points, I'll always trade dice for the objective. But with your list being more veteran, I was expecting you to lose less.
Yeah, but there was a lot of cheap order dice as well. And I blame Mike Smith for that. It was his influence, his Soviet list building influence there. Yeah, so I didn't lose a lot of like the core stuff. I think over the 5 games, I think I lost 2 Stuarts, one in each, one in one game, one in another game. So I absolutely wasn't losing Stuarts, left, right, and centre. But cheap and the flamethrower were pretty useless. Gonna revisit that in the future / not bring it at all. My mules survived. My mules were absolutely stonking.
That was going to be my next question. How many times did the mules die?
I don't think the mules died at all. So double donkeys, totally cheesy. 8 points for 2 dice. It's available. I'm going to take it. They're lovely models as well. It's the Chindit mule teams.
Did you deploy them on prep bombardment missions?
No. They always went in reserve on prep bombardment. They always came in. And then if I didn't have prep bombardment, they just hid behind the biggest piece of terrain they possibly could hide behind.
Yeah, that's always the risk that the times that I've played against people with mules and they've lost them, it's usually because they reserve them for prep and then they never arrive.
Yeah. No, I made that risk. When I played Gary, I waited for his multi-launcher to be taken care of before I brought them on because there was a massive church in my bottom left corner, and the last thing I wanted to do was to, him to aim at the church, and he's taken two mules out, which is pretty unfair for mules, and the RSPCA will also probably have something to say about it as well. So.
Chasing him up.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So where did you place then?
So overall, I finished in 11th. So I exceeded my expectations or hope for the weekend. So I was really pleased with that. 5 great games, 5 great opponents. I played everybody before other than Phil Parker and really enjoyed my game against Phil. And 4 tough opponents, Topher, Paul, Gary and Alex, they're all WTC players. So that was, a really, really enjoyable. So 11th.
Yeah, tough opponents for you.
Yeah.
Because we looked at the strength of schedule afterwards. Well,
we did.
You gathered the data, and do you want to explain how?
Yeah, so we got the results from Reese. Thank you, Reese, for that. And what I did was to go through each round and record for each player the position of their opponent at the end of the 5 games. So, for example, I played Topher in the first game. Topher finished last, so 24 for me for the first game. Did that for all 5 rounds, and then you basically add that up, and you want the lowest number as possible, which essentially shows you. It's a bit of a crude way of doing it, but essentially gives you like a strength of schedule. I played 3 players who finished in the top 10.
Well, that's what I was about to say. Yeah, you played round 2. You played 4th position, 3, 7th position. Round 4 looked like an easier game, 17th. But then in the final round, you played the person who came 3rd, Alex. Yeah. Well done to Alex, by the way.
Yeah. So I finished 11th. Jonny, where did you finish?
So I finished 2nd after Russell. Well done to Russell.
Well done to Russell.
Who didn't lose a game, I believe. I think his last game he got a draw.
Yep.
But to be honest, I think he only needed to win. He only needed to win the secondary. He could have lost the game. As long as he got that secondary, I think 4 wins and a loss with all the secondaries across the weekend, he would have got anyway. But he managed to go undefeated anyway, even though he didn't need to. So huge congratulations to him.
And Alex was 3rd. Alex Bunnock was 3rd. Russell first, you 2nd, Alex 3rd. I'll just give a shout to Mike Smith as well, as he's part of the Pegasus Warlords group. He finished same number of points as me, but a couple of positions lower due to the dice. Really enjoyable. Yeah. 4 of us who'd come up from the south of England, and there was a nice spread as well of English and Welsh players. It was I think it was quite 50-50. I think there's a few more Welsh and English, but it was a nice spread. Obviously, Russell and Paul Wickings are clearly qualifying and counting as Welsh in this situation.
Absolutely, as you can tell from the accent.
Indeed. And the postcodes.
Yeah, and the postcodes. And me and Alex, I think essentially 2 and 3. if it could have went the other way,
Yeah, yeah,
100%. If he had won that first game,
yeah.
he would have been sat on second. So it was a very close tournament.
Yeah, I mean, you were 2 points ahead of Alex to win that first game. Only 1 point would have been a draw, and yeah, we'd be maybe looking at a different table. So really good. What was interesting as well was the spread of nations that people took.
Yeah,
Because we hear on YouTube and on Facebook, how strong the Brits are and Soviets, and I did, to be fair, expect a huge number of British Gurkha para, Stuart List, me being one of them, and I expected to see quite a few.
and how many were there?
I haven't done the deep dive. I'm sure that Russell will do it and maybe chat with Bo about it on YouTube. We're not quite there yet on YouTube, are we? But overall, there was one Japanese list. So, Alex, I thought there'd be more.
I thought there'd be more, especially, as I say, how frustrating it was with the flamethrowers to not be able to touch them.
Mm-hmm.
I thought there'd be a lot more Japanese, but only Alex.
Yeah, only Alex for Japanese. We had one French list from Dan Moody.
Classic.
Only classic, yeah.
With the camels?
I didn't actually see whether or not you had them.
I'm pretty certain at one point I looked over across the store and I could see the camels on the horizon.
Good stuff. Excellent. I would expect nonetheless for Dan. We had 3 US lists, only 3, which is yourself, Gary, and one other. 6 British, 6 Soviets. And surprisingly, the most numerous was Germans, with 7.
Yeah, they are, as I said earlier, they are the army that I think you want to play.
Yeah.
And so most people start with Germans because they've got all the cool tanks.
Yeah.
But then you end up not playing them at tournaments because they're subpar, I would say, competitively.
Yeah. I believe the phrase is "make Germany great again."
Was there anyone you didn't see that you thought you would see?
In terms of people who were there?
No, in terms of nations.
Oh, in terms of nations. You put me on the spot here, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. Norwegians?
Yeah, no Greeks, no Norwegians, no Aussies.
Yeah. I'll tell you the one I thought we might see a Finnish player.
Yeah, that's true.
But we didn't see any of those.
No Italians. I'm sure if Owen had gone to be fair in bowling, we may well have seen some Italians.
Absolutely.
No, I think it was a fairly expected spread, maybe not quite in the numbers across that distribution of nations.
Absolutely. Well, we've got the South Coast GT.
We do
next
indeed.
Month.
We have the South Coast GT first weekend in June in Toyment in Poole. What is, Jonny, the South Coast GT?
Well, the South Coast GT is, of course, what it says on the tin. But also, in addition to that, for anyone interested in playing in the World Open War Tournament, which Russell Wright, the aforementioned Russell Wright there, it's his tournament that he's running, international team tournament, essentially. Yep. So very much will be a competitive, a high level of competition.
With a historical theme.
With a historical theme.
I always like that.
It's a single platoon, 1,100 points. So that's one of the other reasons that I think it's a really interesting one, because slightly different points limit, and also single platoon means some of these builds that people have started to lean on aren't going to work.
Absolutely.
So you can't have your double Stewarts.
No.
You're limited in the number of Gurkhas you can have. So that'll be quite interesting. But yes, so we're going to also use the South Coast GT to basically pick a team for that. So I'll be captaining the English team at the World Open War. And so we'll be looking at the best players from the South Coast GT for that. So my question off the back of that, Phil, was, is there anything that you think we should steal when I'm running the South Coast GT?
As in terms of the event and how it was run?
And yeah, in terms of any of the ideas, anything that we haven't done historically that you thought, you know what, that was such a good idea, we should definitely do that ourselves.
Again, put me on the spot here, aren't you? I like
you on the spot.
Yeah, I like the random draw, the genuinely random draw for the first game. I thought the pack was very clear. Not that your packs aren't, Jonny, but I thought Reese's pack was very clear. Releasing the missions after list deadline, but before the weekend, that was really good as well. It meant you could have a look at it, think about how you might approach each game, which indeed we did do, prior to timely objectives at the beginning of the second day. Don't think there's anything that I would steal. It would be more a case of, doing what we've done in the past when we have run events. and just keep working on that. I think the event just went really, really well by Reese.
Yeah, absolutely. The big thing for me that I saw that I think definitely is worth doing is, as you say, that random draw at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Just something like bingo balls or like raffle tickets, and then those numbers choose your opponents.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really nice way to do it. It meant you really couldn't blame the TO for any parents you didn't like. Yeah,
Yeah.
really well run event overall. Would you go again?
100%. Yeah. As I said, it was my first competitive event. I I was a little bit hesitant about whether or not I would enjoy, playing. Not in terms of the players, but more. I am a historical player. Although you and others are now calling me the historical whacker of our group. But I absolutely loved it. I think what I enjoyed the most was there were very few rule disputes. There were very few moments where you needed to explain the rules to your opponent or vice versa. So you could just crack on and play the game. And because, the quality was so high in terms of players, there was a lot of tactics going on. It wasn't, how many sixes can we roll from indirect HE and multi-launches. You really did have to think. It was mentally exhausting, but in a really good way. I absolutely would go again. I will be obviously help run the South Coast GT, but I will be playing in that as well. I enjoy. I didn't think I wasn't going to enjoy it, but I definitely enjoyed it more than I thought maybe I would.
Yeah, it was. I thought very much similar idea. Obviously, it's the type of tournament I like where you, as long as it's rules legal, Reese allowing it.
Yeah, definitely.
If you threw in a unit that wasn't historical, he didn't mind because it was within the rules, and I really like that because it means you can just sort of choose the units you want to play that are fun. So I went for 8 dodge carriers because I thought that'd be a lot of fun, and it was. As you say, because the opponents that I played were all really good players, the rules queries were there were very few queries of trivial rules. It was all those weird situations like what we talked about in that game against Rich, where you are calling the TO over because there was something that neither player could really come up with, could decide, basically where it's a deeper rule rather than something really trivial. So it meant the games were really smooth, very clean, which meant, as you say, you could focus on the strategy rather than how do I play the game. Absolutely. And it was mentally tiring.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was a brilliant event in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think for me, you said at the start that you like to buy something from the venue. So I went and bought a Bofors, heavily influenced by Gary taking the heavy autocannon against me. So I thought I'll try that out rather than a £25. So I've got an event coming up. The Mike's running in Toyment, so I'm going to bring that.
When is that Toyment event?
That is May the 14th, Sunday, May the 14th.
So very soon.
Yeah, 1,000 point, generic. I think basically anything double generic, single theatre list, and armour platoon. So you can pretty much take what you want. I did do a bit of research, and the Marmon Harrington, because I am a thematic historical player, like we said, was actually used by the Indian Army, and they did appear. I believe some did appear in Burma. That's good enough for me. It's close enough, so I can run my historical whacker Gurkha paratrooper Burma list.
Perfect.
Stretching history somewhat, but there we go.
Well, I believe there definitely were 8 dodge carriers in the US Army.
That's good enough.
Yeah, and there were at least 5 flamethrowers, so perfect.
You're fine, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think I don't have much else to say on the tournament.
No, I have nothing more. Just to say, well done, Reese. Thank you for organising it and running it, and thank you to everyone who went, who played. There was no, other than you, there were no massive rule disputes for the entire weekend, and even yours were done in a nice, gentle spirit. Everyone was happy. It was just.
Yeah. On that note, You could see from the sportsmanship awards.
Yes. Yeah.
Reese gave out all the scores. He didn't give out individual scores, but he did release. And no one scored less than 21 out of 25.
That's right.
And I think the average was just under 24, if not over 24.
Yeah, so there were 9 people scored a maximum 25 out of 25. So the most sporting award was pulled out of the hat. Like I said, Phil Parker received that one. Nobody scored below 21, which just shows, what a great tournament and what a great spirit it was played in.
So really well done to Reese. Fantastic tournament. And I'm sure we'll be going next year.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, I think let's sign off.
Absolutely, yeah. This has been the first podcast, and I hope you guys have enjoyed the first episode.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Johnny.
Right, let's stop recording then. Boink.